Hey all, this is Darren, head of remote at GitLab, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by the two co-founders of Yak. We're going to be talking all things remote. So Hunter and Jordan, thank you very much for joining me today. Give the audience an overview of what Yak is, and then dive into your first question.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, man. Thanks for having us on. Like I said, my name is Hunter McKinley. I am the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer at Yak, and with me is Jordan Walker. He is the COO. Yak is a asynchronous voice collaboration platform for remote teams. So basically like Snapchat, where you can send voice messages and images and screen recordings to your team. So like you and I right now, we're not in the same room. So obviously we needed to do this over Zoom. But if we were on different time zones, that probably wouldn't be possible. So Yak allows you to collaborate with your team if you're not in the same time zone, if you're not in the same office. And what better time than right now during a virus outbreak to be going remote. So we're really excited to be talking to you, especially as one of the largest fully remote organizations out there. You're really setting the standard for the industry, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, for sure. Hunter, do you want to ask some questions now? I know we got some questions for Darren lined up. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah. So one really interesting thing about Darren is that he is the head of remote at GitLab. So I'm just curious, what for those who aren't familiar with that, what does a day look like for the head of remote?
Yeah, every day is different, and that's kind of the beauty of all remote. So we're a fully asynchronous team, and so even if you want to adjust your day to day, we don't have rigid working hours, which allows every day to be highly dynamic. And for somebody like me, I really value that. Of late, I've been using my mornings while it's daylight to spend with my family, go on a walk with my wife and son, and then he goes to bed pretty early, so I've shifted my day to work a little bit more in the evening when he's in bed and it's dark outside. I'm just more productive. So that's one of the subtle nuances that remote allows, but it makes my day-to-day a lot more awesome. In terms of what I actually do, I work with other companies and empowering them and influencing them and giving them the knowledge on how to work better remotely. We fundamentally believe that if GitLab can influence the proliferation of remote first and all remote companies, that the rising tide will lift all boats. And a lot of those companies, when they're going handbook first and they're implementing a lot of the things that we do, GitLab is an amazing tool to use to build your handbook. And so there's some cross-pollination between GitLab, the product, and GitLab, the advice. I also work really closely with hiring, onboarding, and recruiting, making sure that people that join GitLab are onboarded in the right way. A lot of people are joining with decades of experience in a co-located space, and they're coming into a fully all remote environment. It's different. And so I'm there to help guide them, help them acclimate, help them understand how to optimize their workspace, and just think about structuring their day-to-day differently if it's still far into them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess my question would be, was GitLab always remote, or were you the guy who like brought this change about, or like what's the history kind of look like?
Yeah, GitLab was all remote from the beginning. The first 3 members of GitLab were actually in 3 different countries. And so by nature, it became remote right away. Now, when the founders came to California to do Y Combinator, when they graduated Y Combinator, because it was the thing to do, they were kind of forced into an office. And that lasted about a week. People just stopped showing up and work kept getting done. So they just stopped paying for the office. It just wasn't necessary. And it was built into the fabric of the company from the beginning. We fundamentally believe that all remote is the purest form of remote because it puts everyone on a level playing field. There's not an epicenter of power. There's not a time zone that's more important than another. There's not a geography that's more important than another. So everyone is equal. Everyone's a first-class citizen. However, we recognize that most companies, if they are remote, are hybrid remote to some degree. There's usually some amount of people that go into at least one office and then a subset that works outside of the office. And so we work with those companies to try to implement remote first practices so that they're ready for the remote revolution. Companies are only going to grow remotely. Even if it's office to office, those offices are remote to each other.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So like when you came in onto the GitLab team, like at what point were they like, all right, we need a head of remote? Like, why were like, all right, Darren, you're the guy, you're in charge of, now especially with the virus having the world on your shoulders, how did that create, or how did that come about to exist?
No, it's a great question. So when I initially joined, I'm on the marketing team. And so a lot of my job was marketing externally. So communicating with press, media, doing podcasts and panels, helping the world understand what we're doing, pioneering culture, pioneering people, pioneering the way we work. The media knows what we do from the DevOps side of things, from the technical side of things, but less so on the people side of things. So when I initially came in, that was the core function of the role, was to work in marketing that. But it's become really apparent that there's a big need and a big use for someone to be an internal expert, an internal person to help people acclimate, to help people onboard, and to kind of refine and iterate on those processes from someone that has worked in various stages of remote their whole career and can contribute that expertise into making sure we do the best job that we can as we scale. I mean, just last year, we went from 300 or so people to almost 1,000 in 1 year.
That's a busy year.
Which is insane and would have been impossible in a co-located environment. You literally could not have changed offices that many times and still had enough time to hire all those people. So rapid growth could really only happen when you don't have the constraint of an office.
That's amazing. I mean, yeah, man. So when you say you went from 300 to 1,000, I mean, you had to have had the processes in place. Like, could you just walk us through like some of those processes? Because it sounds like you've basically, it sounds like a SaaS, right? Like in SaaS, you could just infinitely scale up. I mean, what's stopping you from going from like 1,000 to 10,000 at this point? So could you just tell us a little bit about some of the processes that you put in place?
Yeah, for sure. So I had the benefit of a lot of these processes were written down years before I joined. So Sid and the co-founders made a fundamental decision early on to work handbook first, to document everything about the company, even as nuanced as the PTO policy, as the benefits that are available to people, the FAQ on the jobs page. All of that was written down and documented in a public facing handbook. So I just want to be clear. There is no internal handbook at GitLab. Literally everything about how we run our company is public to the world. What the world sees is exactly what we see. So we have that accountability that anything that we're going to merge and change in the handbook needs to be good enough for the world to consume. And that's an awesome accountability trigger. So if you printed the handbook out, if you Google GitLab handbook, if you printed that out, it's over 3,000 pages. So I'm personally responsible for the all remote section of the handbook. So if you Google GitLab's guide to all remote, you'll see all of the guides that I've stood up on how we do meetings, how we do async, what we think about documentation, how we do hiring and compensation, all of those things. But the fundamentals, things like communication, things like how do we do asynchronous? How do we do meetings? All of that was documented before I joined so that in my onboarding process, I simply read and ingested what was already documented. So there was zero ambiguity. There was nothing to discover and figure out on my own. It was all there. And if I got a few weeks into the job and I thought, I'm curious how this happens, all I have to do is make a query in the handbook. And sure enough, there's a handbook page there outlining how it's done. Even something as mundane as how do you fill out an expense report? At a normal company, you have to tap someone on the shoulder. They walk you through it. At GitLab, you just search for expense report in the handbook and the entire step-by-step guide is there, which at scale creates massive efficiencies because you have hundreds of people that are able to self-service and find the answers they need when they need them, regardless of what time zone they're in, instead of having to bother someone with something that's already written down.
Right.
It's amazing. Well, I mean, just one of the things that you guys wrote down was that decision making is something that's not based on like a hierarchy, or it's sometimes based on a hierarchy, but I'll read just a sentence of it. Voting on material decisions shows a lack of informed leaderships. So when you talk about how people are equal, and everyone, you called it a first-class citizen. Everyone's a first-class citizen at GitLab, but then it's also not a democracy. I mean, obviously that wasn't just your first go, and you just came out of the gate with that. So how do you come up with decision-making processes? Obviously, you need to iterate over time. So could you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to say two things here. The first is we separate decision-making from decision gathering. Most companies try to combine that in one. So they just try to get a meeting together where they gather consensus and then they also make the decision. But that's a really archaic way to do it. And it almost never works asynchronously. So instead, you want to put a notion out there, gather feedback on it, not looking for consensus. You're simply looking for input on the idea. And then the next stage of it is to hand it over to the directly responsible individual, the DRI, and they make the decision.
Right.
So you separate decision making from the inputs that go into it. Now, practically speaking, how that works is everyone at GitLab is empowered to contribute. We fundamentally believe that everyone can contribute. So the GitLab handbook, for example, the all remote section is mine. I'm responsible for it. But anyone in the company, finance, engineering, design, it doesn't matter. Anyone can make a merge request to add or change or delete something in the all remote section. And then they just assign it to me. So they can make their case for why they're making this change. Sometimes it's as simple as, hey, I fixed a typo. Sometimes it's something that's more significant, like, hey, my group did meetings a new way. I think we should add this so we can make this page better. The reason why this works, the reason why this doesn't create mass chaos of just letting everyone contribute to everything is because we empower DRIs to make the ultimate call with no explanation needed. So we do believe in a hierarchy. So if you're the code owner of the finance section of the handbook, for example, if I make a proposal to change something in the finance section and I put my heart and soul into it, like lay out the proposal, this is what I believe, the actual DRI of the finance page has no obligation to even acknowledge that. Like they don't even have to look at it. They definitely don't have to merge it. They don't even owe me a response. This is the only way it works. But we built a culture where if you put together a functional, great proposal, we also have sub-values like see each other succeed, blameless problem solving, be nice to one another, be kind to one another, give each other permission to play. When you use these values in a meaningful way, chances are high that if somebody puts in an amazing amount of effort to contribute to your code, your domain, you're going to at least read it. You might not be able to read all of it. It's just like hundreds of comments pour in, but we're professionals. And at the end of the day, I'm the DRI for my site and I'm accountable for making sure it's as great as it can be. And that includes, did I ignore something that could have made it better or not? So the checks and balances work out. And it's amazing what happens when you empower everyone to contribute to the fabric of the company, because now everyone is invested. When you give a designer the power to change finances pages, that's really empowering. It makes you think, what can we do on the finance side to be a better company? What can we do on the human operations side to be better? What can we do on the engineering side? What do I want to learn about engineering so that I can contribute to that? You create this sort of natural organic interest in cross-division collaboration that you won't get any other way.
In general, do you think that's like one of the biggest fears that people have about going remote? Just in some of the companies that we've talked to, they kind of have that problem. They're like, you know, what if this person does this or this person tries to do that? But it sounds like you guys are kind of the opposite. In fact, you're, like you said, empowering people to make these broader decisions. So yeah, I guess, do you think that's one of the big fears or like worries or mistakes people make when trying or thinking about going remote?
Generally speaking, yes. Remote kind of removes the command and control that has been so pervasive in co-located environments for so long, and it's long overdue. Like seeing someone in a seat is not indicative of how much they're working. Yeah. Seeing someone smile in a cubicle across from you is not indicative that all is well with their life. Like just because they look okay doesn't mean they're okay. And so remote is kind of democratizing that and tearing down some of those preconceived norms that have just happened in co-located spaces just because. And yeah, there is a fear of like, well, they'll just do anything if we empower them to do anything. But here's the difference. No one in GitLab can just do anything. You have to submit a merge request to change something, to ship a new line of code, to change something in the product. Everyone can make a request, but only the DRI can actually merge this and push the change out to the world. That's the difference. So there's no risk in letting the whole company make proposals. It's not like they're pushing stuff live.
Right.
And that's the beauty of using GitLab, the product, to manage all of our company. Even our marketing projects, we use GitLab. So it allows people to essentially operate in the sandbox. You can make any proposal you want. far-fetched or crazy as it may be, make the proposal, like make the merge request, surface it to people, get feedback on it. It may never happen, but it was a good exercise, and people learn when they see that. And people are just more likely to put good thoughts out there than to stifle it. People often ask, like, oh, how can you replicate whiteboarding or brainstorming in a remote setting the way that you can, foster innovation in an office? I'll tell you how. Empower everyone to make a proposal to change literally anything, and you're going to find some amazing innovation tucked in corners of the brains of people you never saw coming.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. The first that you said was really interesting about how seeing someone smile doesn't necessarily mean they're happy at work or they're actually in work. Something that we talk about a lot about internally is like perceived busyness. Like when you're in an office environment, people are like, oh man, I gotta look like I'm working, or like be online on Slack. But like, if I look the part, someone assumes, oh, they must be working, they must be happy, and that's not necessarily the case. I think it's really interesting that you guys can think about that the same way. Because perceived busyness is really, really dangerous, and it gets to a point where people actually aren't getting work done. They're more focused on being present at work instead of just doing it.
And it's actually the wrong metric to go after. So if you look at GitLab's values, results is our top value, and we measure and appreciate results over hours. And in fact, part of the reason we are so disciplined about everything, meetings is a great example. A quick aside on that. The only meeting at GitLab that you can have without an agenda is a coffee chat where you can just talk about anything, life, work, whatever. For every other meeting, you're going to think twice about even calling for one, because the person that calls the meeting has to affix an agenda so that people can contribute asynchronously. So if they're not going to be able to make the call, you have to give them the opportunity to write their questions down in advance so that someone else can verbalize it and document it for them. It has to be inclusive. People that even are sleeping while the call has happened, you have to be inclusive of that and give them the chance to contribute asynchronously. And then after that, it's on the burden of the meeting organizer to contextualize what happened, not just transcribe, but actually put context around it and inject those into the appropriate places in the handbook, which is a lot of extra work. So you're going to think twice about doing that, because it'd be a lot easier to just do it async and skip the meeting altogether. And we want that forcing function in place so that meetings just don't happen haphazardly. And I've gone so far down this meeting thread, I think I've like deviated from the original. Remind me what that original question was.
No, it's fine. We're the same way. We're kind of anti-meeting too. Sure, there's time and place in the meeting, but yeah, we are anti-meeting. That's kind of really the whole reason that Yak exists. Is like, you don't need a 30-minute phone call all the time. Sometimes you just need a quick, hey, I have a question, I need an answer. So, yeah. I know we have a couple more questions. Do you want to fire some of them off?
Yeah, well, before I get too far, you said that you guys have not only you have to transcribe it, but you also need to put context around it. So I'm just curious, what tools are you guys using right this second so that way you can do that easily?
Yeah, so some of our teams use transcription tools like Otter to pull out text from calls, and then from there, it's on everyone really to look at what the agenda notes were, what were the takeaways, and then to add context of where does this need to be put in the handbook. So you need to have a baseline understanding of what the structure of the handbook is so that it's easy to reference, like, okay, right, we made a decision about this engineering project, so I'm going to go over to that respective handbook page and add this, or make a merge request and then assign it to the right person to make sure you got the details right, and then the DRI would merge it. So it's really on all of us. I've actually just did a podcast earlier where I told the host that one of the things we try to hire for is not just for someone that can write well or document, but that's a great storyteller. Because at a fully remote company, we have to communicate with low context. So if you Google GitLab low context communication, I stood up a handbook page on this explaining what it is. But we have to deliver messages with lots of precision, lots of detail, and you have to put context around the project. Think 2 or 3 questions ahead of what might be asked of me on this. Because you got to remember, when you're moving a project forward, the ideal way to do it is to do it in a way where you assume everyone else is asleep. So if you say, all right, literally no one in the company is online right now, how do I move this forward? that will put you in an asynchronous mindset, and it'll help shape your story and add context to whatever you're writing down, such that whenever anyone on your team wakes up and they see it, they have the right context to take the next step without waking you up. That is the ultimate goal. And if you can accomplish that at scale, you'll have the most efficient team in the world and the most sane with the fewest pings and notifications. And they'll appreciate that too.
Man, I feel like you're dropping so many nuggets here. It's insane. Just before I get to my next one now, how long have you been doing this? I think you might have mentioned it before, but.
Yeah, I've worked remotely in various stages of remote my entire career. So that's 14 years now. And in some companies, I was in the minority. I've worked at one company where we had about 7 offices globally, but only about 10 people were fully remote. And we had no remote infrastructure whatsoever. No Microsoft Teams, no Slack. It was like group iMessages. It was
Oh my God.
struggle. It was a struggle. And now I'm working in a place that's 100% remote where they have everything dialed in. We don't have everything completely figured out. Even GitLab is iterating all the time, but we're in a good spot compared to most places. So I have that experience of knowing like how rough it can be, but still in a remote space, to kind of the utopia of remote that we're still figuring out in real time.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that you talked about earlier, or in your handbook, is that you guys don't have project managers. Now that you've scaled from 300 to 1,000, is that still true?
For the most part, yeah, it really is. We have DRIs, but a lot of times in a co-located space, a project manager simply exists to get various elements or various departments in the company on the same page. So if you're managing a project that needs a website stood up, then you need to get web design involved. And then if there's messaging involved, you also have to get corporate communications to make sure that's okay. And maybe there's something that like legal needs to get involved in, so on and so forth. So a project manager is like, okay, got it. I'm going to try to get as many of the right people as possible brought into this. The reason why we don't need that, and this is a real example for what I'm dealing with right now, I'm working with a team to do an all remote report based on a survey that we've commissioned, GitLab has commissioned. So this is the first time we're ever doing this. So we have to work with a third-party agency to get the answers. I need to work with my own internal teams to stand up a website. I'm talking to design a PDF that we're going to send out to media. I'm working with our PR team to develop a press release. Many areas of the company that I'm touching. I'm not a project manager, but what I know how to do is start a GitLab issue and tag the right people in the right parts of the company. And how do I know this? Because like everything at GitLab, our org chart is public. So if you Google GitLab org chart, you can just find who does what. So it's very simple. I don't have to be a project manager. I just look at our org chart and I'm like, oh great, yep, there's somebody in design. And if I tag the wrong person in design, like let's say I stand this up and I'm laying out the deadlines and I need everybody to come together and help me, and I tag the wrong person in design, we have a sub value of blameless problem solving coupled with see each other succeed. So at a normal company, you may get chastised for that. Like, oh, this person doesn't know what's going on. Like they're tagging the wrong person. What are they doing? But at GitLab, it's a whole different culture where it's like, oh, yeah, cool. Like I understand why you're doing that. I'm actually not the design lead for things like this. So I'm just going to untag myself, unassign myself, and I'm going to reassign the right person, and I'm going to help you out. It's really simple. But the core thing about that doesn't happen in most companies is the kindness of, hey, this person tried to do something. They took initiative. They did it themselves. It was a little off. So let's just help them fix it. And that's a cultural thing, man. I don't know any other way to put it, but it's just baked into who we are as a company.
Okay, so you don't necessarily believe in the title of project manager, even though in this case you are managing a project. You're just not the project manager. Okay,
correct.
So you're basically empowering. Would you say that anybody can take that on? Would any employee in GitLab be able to do what you did, or do you have to be a DRI? What do you call it?
Well, you would be the DRI for that project. So I think it would kind of instinctively work. Like you wouldn't just throw an issue together and tag a bunch of people to help you do something that like you weren't doing. You know? So if you were empowered to do that thing by your manager, then you are the DRI. And then you have the ability and the empowerment to go get the help that you need. to see it through. Yeah.
Awesome. To keep this more relevant to like the second, before the call, we were talking about coronavirus. Obviously, that presents a lot of problems in the world, but we just put a blog out recently about how Iran, Japan, South Korea, these countries are really empowering their employees to go remote. I'm just curious how that's impacted your life and GitLab.
GitLab as a whole, it's a minimal impact because we're all remote already. So I think the only real impact would be if you don't usually work from home. So GitLab isn't work from home. We just tell you there's no office to commute to. So we will happily reimburse co-working fees or external office fees if an external space is more amenable to your working. And we have about 20% of the company on a monthly basis that takes us up on that. They just prefer to work outside of their home for whatever reason, doesn't matter. So in those cases, if they're in impacted countries, it might make more sense to work from home instead of the co-working space. So it might alter their day-to-day workflow a little bit. But I think more broadly, it's got a lot of eyes on GitLab as kind of the authority and the pioneer of doing remote. What you see happening is a lot of companies are being thrust into this kind of crisis-driven work from home phenomenon, which is fundamentally different than an intentionally structured remote work environment. And so while it's easy to say like, oh, there's a bunch of companies doing remote now, it's actually doing a disservice to the term remote, because a crisis-driven forced work from home is very different than doing something intentional. A lot of these companies have no intention of remaining work from home. A lot of these companies might not have the right tools and processes to do it the right way. They don't have an in-house expert on acclimating to remote. And they're not being intentional about doing things different now that they are remote. So a lot of companies I'm seeing, unfortunately, we're trying to replicate the in-office environment remotely. So for example, if there was like a scheduled boardroom meeting with 30 people in it, they're just trying to shoehorn 30 people into a Zoom call instead of thinking, hey, could we do this asynchronously? But that's the kind of question you would ask if it was an intentionally structured program. When you're just thrust into it, it's a crisis-driven type of situation. You might not feel like you had the time to do something like that. So we're seeing the world kind of look to GitLab in some ways on how do we do this well. And if you're watching this and you're in a company where that's the case, I would encourage you to Google GitLab's Guide to All Remote, and I will include the link in the show notes. And we've set up guides on how we do it. It's all open source. Copy it, implement it, and you can make a merge request to contribute ways to make it better.
Yeah, that's sweet. That's sweet. Yeah, everybody should go check it out. We've definitely have checked it out a little bit, and like Hunter said before, going some nuggets from you. So yeah, all good stuff in there, man. All good stuff.
Yeah, man. I got a lot out of this. I mean, I think one of the coolest things about GitLab is how you have everything fully public. And I've seen this movement. I don't know if you guys were the first ones to do it, but I've seen this movement of sharing metrics and in your case, handbooks. And I just think it's really powerful to have the world be your accountability, not just internally. So just people like us that are trying to get the word out about remote and doing it the right way, we really appreciate it because it gives us sort of like this Bible to go after. So I got a lot out of this.
Absolutely, man. No, I appreciate it. And I'll just close by saying it's not like remote is the future of work. Remote is already here. We're just finally hitting a point where companies are willing to admit that, hey, we are a remote company. Even though we have two offices that are remote to each other, we should probably figure out how to be more transparent and open and allow these teams to work better together. And that's great for us. I mean, we want more companies to embrace this. The more people doing remote the better for everyone involved. So thank you both for the questions and for the audience. Be sure to check out the show notes for links on things that we talked about today. Subscribe to GitLab Unfiltered. And if you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter and hit up the guys on Twitter. Hunter and Jordan, thanks so much. Have a great day.